Hey, Marcus. I'm McLean Robbins, Vice President of Marketing at MBO Partners. I have been at MBO far longer than the average job tenure of an employee these days, and we'll get into why that's important in a little bit. But I started as our Director of Content Marketing and Content Strategy back in 2015 and have worked my way up to lead the marketing department. MBO is a dual-sided platform that helps independents start, run, and grow high-end professional businesses and helps enterprises engage, scale, and optimize the independent workforce.
And you and I actually go back a few years. We've worked together on some projects, and one of the things that I think is so interesting, just to set up a context-wise for what MBO is all about, is that you have so many different. Well, I don't want to say so many different. You have different categories of what you would consider clients or customers, right? And just to give a little context, if you can explain like how the platform works or how the company works with relation to the independents you work with, as well as the enterprises that you work with, and how this might relate to some of what we talk about with positioning and messaging.
Absolutely. So we are both B2B and B2B2C. And so on the enterprise side, I mentioned we help enterprises engage, scale, and optimize their work. So enterprises today work with many independent professionals, self-employed individuals, and it's very different for a large enterprise to engage a freelancer or an independent than it is for a smaller business. There are issues around classification, proper tax payment, et cetera. And so for many years, MBO really did that. We just enabled large enterprises to pay and make sure that from a legal standpoint, they compliantly engaged these independents. And we gave them, back in the days of sort of one throat to choke methodology, we made it really, really simple for them to pay these people and make sure that all the legal ramifications were settled out. Now, what we do is we make it easy, not just for people to engage and pay these independents, but we make it easy for them to find and manage their networks of independents as well. And so today in the United States, there's actually just under 65 million independents working. And about 20% of those people who do it full time are what we would call true high end independent professionals, meaning they're earning over $100,000 a year. They're doing this work full time. They're working in just about every type of profession. And that's who our clients are trying to engage. We work with many professional services firms, the big four, almost all the large tech firms that you've heard of, healthcare firms, retail firms. So our clients are well into that Fortune 1000 mix, and they're engaging not just hundreds, but thousands of independent professionals on any given week. And so we make it really easy for them to find those independent professionals, do the work with those professionals, and then engage them again and again. And so our service here at MBO has expanded from that compliance and engagement all the way through to the management and the scale of how to attract this high-end workforce, how to work with that workforce, and then how to make sure that when you want to tap into those people again and again, you can do so.
And that leads into like kicking off our conversation about specifically any kind of stories about positioning, messaging challenges that you've had to overcome or figure out ways around. It can be specifically to MBO, or it can be something, prior to that, or other things that you've been working on. But I think I just wanted to set up that context because I think what MBO does is a little bit unique with the what you said. It's not just strict B2B, right?
It's not, and I think we've had some interesting challenges. Um, First of which is that we're a 30-year-old company in a tech platform space. And so there are tech platforms in the future of workspace that are really spinning up every single day, but there are very few that have 30 years of experience in this industry, or just under 30 if we're going to be technical about it. And our business didn't start as B2B. It started as B2C. It started as a business that helped independents set up and run their independent professional business. So MBO actually stands for My Business Office, or My Biz Office, because we got cute in the early 2000s and shortened that. And so we were helping independents start, run, and grow their professional businesses. So setting up their LLC, making sure when they worked with an enterprise, we negotiated their contracts, making sure they got paid. And all of our services expanded from there. So our founder, Gene Zano, who's still on our board of directors, whom I'm still very close with today, had this really passionate vision that someday people in the US would want to be self employed, that they would want to work for themselves, that they would get some fulfillment from doing so, and that they needed a single source of making it really easy and an advocate for them. Um, Not only has that come true, I think it's come true beyond all of our wildest dreams. And the enterprise side of our business, which is really the predominant side of our business today, has come up as a natural extension of our work with independents. And so when I first started with the organization back in 2015, we had many thousands of independents that worked on our platform that were starting, running, and growing their business, and a very relatively nascent enterprise marketing program, or really a nascent enterprise program and no enterprise marketing program at all. And we were just beginning to get scale with enterprises that needed to engage these independents. And they said, we've got Booz Allen Hamilton was one of our large clients at the time. They still are. And they said, we have 5,000 independents billing on the platform each week. We need your help making sure that we pay them compliantly. And then we had clients like PwC who would come to us and ask for the same thing. And so it's really important that we talk about that journey for our organization, because it's really impacted our philosophy and, quite frankly, our marketing strategy. So around 2015, when I joined the organization, we launched what's called a marketplace that helped enterprises put job recs out for independent professionals. And it's at that time that we began to see some really great scale in our organization around enterprises coming directly to us for the service and saying, we know you can manage those independents that work on our platform, but can you help me do so in a more strategic manner? And so throughout my time in the marketing department here, I've gone from branding our organization as one that supports independence, really a B2B2C platform, to pivoting that to become a true technology platform as our tech stack built up and grew around it, to be one that is primarily now B2B, enterprise focused, that we really say to enterprises, yes, when you have independence, and every business in the world today does, when you have independence, it's not enough to just engage them and pay them on time. That's table stakes. What you need to do now is develop a direct relationship with those high-end professionals, curate that relationship with them, and not just do the basics of engagement and payment, but form relationships with them. Make sure that this program is baked in as part of what we call a total talent strategy at your organization. And make sure that your leadership at your organization is thinking about independence as a core pillar of their future of work programming. Because what we're seeing in terms of data and numbers is that people don't want to work full time anymore. They want to work full time, but they don't want to work full time as an employee. They're going to work independently. And the higher and more skilled those workers are, the more in demand those workers are, the less likely they are to want to be your full time employee. And our data shows this, and our enterprises show this. So we've really spent the past, I'm going to say 3 years post COVID, working hands-on with the enterprises on our platform and attracting many new ones as well, to a net new strategy called direct sourcing in the B2B space, about how to attract top independent professionals and how to engage and optimize your workforce as a result, or scale and optimize your workforce, to be more technically correct. And that's really changed the game and changed the messaging of MBO as well. So we've had, I would say, a lot of wins, but a lot of challenges along the way, to take a company that for 30 years really did a very specific thing for independence and then pivot it to an enterprise or dual-sided platform.
Yeah, and the first thing I'm thinking of, and having had, direct knowledge of this, what we're talking about right now with the messaging, and having some insight into that, when you mentioned about independence as the core pillar, and we can it hasn't always been this way, but especially the last few years, there's been so much talk about attracting and retaining talent. And the conversation has tended, at least in my view, to be kind of centered around full-time talent, employees. Where as an independent, self-employed person, freelancer, or whatever we call it, The dynamic has always felt the opposite of that, where it's us as the freelancer or the independent, that it's upon us to sell ourselves and to, you know, promote ourselves to clients, enterprise or otherwise. And that, you know, while we want to establish a good relationship with those clients, it's essentially the dynamic always felt, at least for me, that it was like, not that you're replaceable, but that you're not necessarily, their thinking is not, we need to retain our independent people as well. And I was just curious, with as that positioning has evolved over the last few years, and you're kind of educating the market about like, hey, if you want to retain top talent, independent talent, you have to be able to go beyond just paying them on time. How has that message hit? Is that message something that resonated with how they already look at it, or is it a little bit of a curve with them having to adjust to how they even look at working with freelancers or consultants?
Sure. Well, I think that the industry has definitely evolved post COVID, and that's been a real boon to us. You saw a great, which people often call the great resignation. We at MBO prefer to call it the great realization, where organizations needed to, because of the COVID pandemic, lay off many, many people. In hospitality, it's because your business shuttered because nobody was in your hotels or in your restaurants. In other organizations, it was a cost saving, sort of preventative measure. And then we saw, as COVID subsided, or at least we got a couple months into it, we saw businesses need to do a massive amount of rehiring. What we saw during that period is that businesses had a real struggle to rehire people because people were sort of gun shy. They said, "You just laid me off. You just really screwed me over as a full-time employee." And they had gone and gotten perhaps some government assistance, but perhaps they had gone into freelancing. And we can see this with BLS data about what we would call high propensity businesses and non-high propensity businesses, the amount of people creating EINs, net new businesses. The amount of people creating businesses that were intending to never have employees, that were going to be self-employed, doubled during COVID. At one point, it was like almost 4x, and I'll happily share the graphic with you afterwards so that you could, share it with your listeners. But that really was an indicator to us, along with our own data from what we call the State of Independence, which is the largest running research on the independent workforce in the US. We're now going to be 13 years in this fall, that people want to be self-employed, or they really took the COVID pandemic as an accelerant to self-employment. And so your point is, businesses aren't necessarily sure about how to engage these workers, and they treat, or have in the past treated, independence as somewhat disposable. So COVID really poured gasoline on the fire of independence, people going independent. But it also said to enterprises, listen, you need to wake up. You're having trouble engaging full-time people because people don't want to work for you full-time anymore. But there's talent out there. There's obviously the same amount of people in the US, well, slightly fewer, but the same amount of people in the US that there were pre-COVID. Your issue isn't that there aren't enough bodies to do the work. It's that the bodies available to do the work don't want to do it for you full time. So you're going to have to change your strategy. So for us, one of the best things that ever happened was the COVID pandemic. But it was also not just because of the people, it was because the technology finally said, you didn't want a contractor because maybe that contractor didn't want to come on site. You didn't want a contractor because it was hard to integrate your contractor with the team. So technology finally was forced to evolve during COVID. We finally had to give up those norms of working in an office. We finally had to give up the norms, and you and I spoke about this before we got on the recording here, that you had to be in a specific city. Obviously, we I think met when you lived in Northern Virginia, which is where I live, but now you're in Ohio, I'm in Virginia. We can still stay connected. We can still do these types of engagements. And during COVID, MBO, they went remote. Our headquarters are now in Austin, Texas. We have an office that people sort of hotel work in out of Ashburn, Virginia. But before that, we all sat in an office 5 days a week. So all of these factors were contributing to enterprises being able to engage independence in a more strategic way. And whether they were able to or whether they were forced to is kind of, I'm going to say, not the point. I like to say able to because it's just a more positive scenario. But they had to. They had to rethink what their strategy was going to be, and they had to do it in a way that was going to be scalable, cost efficient, and future proof.
Yeah, and I think it brings up a really important point too. When we think about positioning, and you talked a little bit about the evolution of the positioning of MBO partners, and we've all talked about COVID so much because it's a big deal, right? I mean, there's like, it's almost like when the internet became a thing. It's like it's a big deal, right? It's a big shift. It's a paradigm shift, and I think one of the lessons to think about, at least that I think of as somebody who would be involved in positioning strategy and how that relates to messaging and how that relates to how you're connecting with the audience based on the problem they're experiencing, that what your hypothesis of their problem might be on day one and how external factors that you would never have been able to anticipate prior to 2020, right, can completely shift how they view a problem, what they even see as being a problem, right? And how the positioning, the strategy behind that has to evolve as well, right? It's a living, breathing thing. It's not just based on what we kind of look at as these kind of static problems that companies have, hiring employees, whatever it is. And so I just was wondering if you can kind of maybe riff a little bit on that and how you've seen maybe internally to what degree that created a challenge as far as being able to look at the external situation, how it was impacting how your customers, enterprises in this case, were evaluating a problem or how they saw a problem, and how you were able to kind of move the ship, right? Turn the tanker around a little bit so that it's actually aligned with this new reality.
Sure. Well, hindsight is 2020, obviously. So I can say it's a lot easier to look at it 3 years out. And if I'm talking to another marketer that says, how do I do this? How do I get through this problem? I always say, a little bit of context and a little bit of time, or it's going to make it a lot easier. So I don't ever want to sound like we had all the answers on day one. But the first thing that we were very lucky to ground in is we had a strategy before COVID. We knew that we helped, as I've said, enterprises engage, scale, and optimize their workforce. We had that engagement portion for independents down. We knew what we call direct sourcing, how to go direct to independents. And we thought we were selling something called workforce optimization, how to take your workforce and strategically talk about that necessary mix between full-time, offshore, and independent labor. And we were very sort of, this is what we do. We do workforce optimization. What we realized during COVID is that most organizations, they're not there yet. They are struggling. Many are still struggling on the engage side. How do I just do this compliantly? They're finally waking up to realize, yep, I have a portion of people who are independent. And then they definitely need help on the scale. How do I find these people? How do I manage them? How do I treat them as part of the team? How do I create a program? And very few are at that, what we call that optimized point, where they're going, this is a strategic priority for my workforce. How do I figure it out? So I think what we realized first and foremost is that our messaging was a little bit lofty and a little bit too advanced for our audience. And you see this in almost every industry. So I'll say I'm embarrassed that I didn't think of this sooner, quite frankly. You want to talk at a 301, PhD program level to your clients because you assume that they're very, very educated. Most need 101 level content. And while individuals are very, very smart, large B2B organization, the types that we work with, your Fortune 100s, the ship moves slowly. And even during COVID, when the ship needed to move fast so that the organization didn't fail, when it comes to your most important asset, which is your people, you cannot make change overnight. And you cannot undo decades, if not centuries, of an employment model and simply rip that apart and have contractors. You would have mass chaos. So we needed to meet our organizations in the middle and not dumb down our message, but refine what we sold so that people could understand what it was. And that was a real challenge on my end as a marketer. We needed to convince our leadership team that workforce optimization was not it. And I'm super lucky. I had a really great partner in our chief revenue officer who just has been in our industry for 20 plus years. I'm going to, Bob, if you're listening, I'm going to give you the credit there and say 20 plus years. You're so youthful. I think he's probably been in it more than that. But he really knew what our clients wanted, and we were able to together make that business case that that middle tier, what we call scale, it's really where most clients were. And we needed to refine our messaging to go hard at what we call direct sourcing or scale. And we needed to focus that 301 level message on just those very few clients that wanted to hear it. So our positioning challenge was going too far. Our messaging need was to refine, and I'm going to say dumb it down a little, but really it was just to hone in on the areas that people were really willing to buy, to sell where people were willing to buy and meet us halfway. And we've seen pretty incredible growth as a result.
Yeah, and regarding the messaging too, and I always think back to, before companies like Gong, and before we'd see on LinkedIn people posting like what, it's much more conversational now and B2B, where it felt like every B2B website I ever looked at started with, we are the leading blah, blah, blah of blah, 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 right? And there
Of
was this,
course, we may
yeah.
have that statement somewhere, Marcus.
Well, I mean, they all do, right? Every company does. But as far as the banner, right? As far as the primary thing that B2B companies would assume that the customer or the client would care about, the assumption used to be, at least it seemed like, that it was all about bolstering the company, right? Bolstering, like, we are so awesome. And one of the ways they would, I think that the culture of B2B was, one of the ways they would do that is to try to sound really sophisticated, right? Because this is very important work. Like you said, 301 versus 101. But the problem with that is that for somebody looking at your website for the first time, they're not paying that close attention, right? Like they're
No.
not at that level with you yet. Like if you're doing a webinar or speaking, or you getting into the real, kind of granular stuff, yeah, we can get real complex. But somebody's scrolling through, and they're probably doing something else while they're doing that. It's like, when you even mention dumbing it down, it's just like simplifying and clarifying. Like, what is the essence of it that strips away all of the extraneous language that has nothing to do with the problem they're dealing with and how they would want to solve it? And it's totally just like, just the style that so many of us had just been surrounded by with B2B, right? So that's probably when you mentioned like internally, you had to kind of go to the senior leadership team, and there was maybe a little bit of resistance to changing that approach. I think so much of it is baked in, right? It's almost like this cultural shift within companies to go, it's okay to be real with people. It's okay to sound like a person.
Yeah. And I do think, the average people's problems are fairly pedestrian, and that's fine. I need people to fill a specific role. That hiring manager is sitting out there going, I need bodies, I need talent. I need to figure out a way to engage them. The independent is going, I'm not going to jump through 75 hoops to get this done. I don't want to go through a staffing firm and have them take 30 to 40% of my salary when I could be going direct to the client because that's possible now. I don't want to have to, engage through middlemen and third party suppliers. So we knew there was a need in the market to meet people where they were. And I'm going to say we're very lucky that we had the technology and the teams that were able to make that happen. And as far as the more sophisticated sale, we're lucky to say that we have clients that are ready to go there. But you're right, it has to happen later. And we need to step away from we're the best at X, Y, and Z and sort of perceive your problems and meet the people where they are. This is what we do. This is how we can help you.
Yeah, and it's almost like, I've always been a big believer in this, sales/marketing cohesion, right? And you think about somebody that's in a sales role having a conversation with a prospect, I I'm sure it's all over the map, but essentially you're going to start out with understanding what they care about and speaking like a person to them, and listening and asking clear questions. And then as they get through into a demo, or they going, maybe you're presenting to the CFO or something, now you can start to get more technical, or let's say it's an engineering issue, right? It's some kind of like IT security thing. There's plenty of time for that. But it's, I think, messaging that kind of like follows the same philosophy of, it's like, let's connect with the human being first and understand, right, what it is. And I'm just very happy to see over the last few years, especially, that has become much more prevalent, because there was a time a long time ago where I almost didn't want to continue working in B2B, excuse me, because I just was like, I just don't want to talk like this.
Well, it's all buzzwords and jargon. And I will say we couldn't do our jobs here in marketing if we didn't have a great partnership with our sales team. Our B2B sale is very, very complex. Again, you're working with Fortune 500, Fortune 100 style organizations. So they've got multiple buyer units. Sales really does carry the heavy lift. We deliver them MQLs every week, and we discuss the value of those MQLs, but they've got to do a lot of work to close that sale. And so I think, we've adapted a strategy that works well for us. We do a lot of very top of funnel education about why the type of solution we sell in the market is necessary. We need to do a lot of education at the top of the funnel as to what is the independent workforce? Why is the independent workforce valuable? Because not everybody gets that still these days. You and I as professionals know that there's tons of high-end independents out there, but that's still news to some organizations. The concept of what we do, direct sourcing, is still new and a new term for people, or they understand it, but they've not really experienced it for themselves. So we do a lot of work with primary research data, a lot of work with editorial style thought leadership that builds a business case. And then we let our sales team come in and do the technical. So if you look at our website, you're going to find a lot of facts about the independent workforce. You're going to find a lot of advocacy style information. And so I do think that's a differentiator for our B2B marketing, versus some more sort of pure play tech platforms. We do sell the platform, but we sell the overall knowledge of the independent workforce more than many of our comp set.
And as we close out, I wanted to ask, kind of to build on what we mentioned about that alignment with sales, and I think of it in terms of that feedback loop, right? So you're just mentioning things that you were able to see what works, not only what works as far as tactically, but what these customers and clients are actually really needing, where the holes, where the gaps are between the assumption or the hypothesis and what the real world for them, like you mentioned about the optimization, right? In addition to the sales team and having that alignment, are there any particular feedback loops that you think are really useful as a marketer to make sure that there's always a two-way direction of communication, as opposed to just we're in our little lab coming up with awesome copy, thinking it's great, and we're putting it out there, and just the only testing is just like A/B testing,
Yeah, I'll respectfully, we don't do a ton of A/B testing on the site, and it's not to say that we shouldn't and we can't. There's value and there's a place for it, particularly in email copy. But I had to learn a couple of really hard lessons, and I'll credit my my chief revenue officer, who's now moved into a different role in the organization, in special projects, but worked really closely with him for a few years. And I had to do two things, and I will say I cannot overestimate, or I cannot understate the importance of working with my sales teams. I worked one-on-one with the sales lead. Thank you to Christian Rayner on our sales team, who's just a fantastic, he's always got time. Can I bounce something off of you? So we work through every stage of that funnel. What are our personas? Are we happy with our personas? What are the organizations? Do we like the organizations? Do we like these titles? Are we okay with this? How does this messaging sound? Do we like this cadence? So we really go through step by step by step. Nothing really comes out of the marketing department that sales and I aren't in lockstep on. But I also can't discount account management. And so with a big, complex organization, partnership with sales is important, but we have sales on the front end of the house, and then not inside sales, but account management once they're converted to clients. Partnership with account management is equally important, because that's what's coming out of your clients. This is what they're seeing when they're using the product. This is what's working. This is what isn't. This is where they're stuck. And so we take those feedback loops with account management, put them back into the top of the funnel, do work to cross sell, upsell within existing clients, and we refine our messaging accordingly. And then we have a third layer to that, which is as a product organization, we also have our product team. So my job as head of the marketing organization is to work with our leadership, to work with our sales team, to work with our account teams, and to work with our product teams, have a really clear line into each, and to bring our brand and our strategy to life. But I cannot do anything in a silo and say, we know best, we're just putting it out, oh, we're doing the testing. I have to come with messaging and with a thesis, and sure, with my data, with my A/B testing, but I really need to make sure they're all aligned to it because they're the ones who are talking to the customer day to day. And that is a difficult blend, and it's a dose of, quite frankly, humility that many marketers would be well put to take, so to speak, because I see a lot of people say, oh, marketing says they just know best. I'm going to say, I don't know best. I don't talk to the clients every single day. I talk to them as often as I can, but the people that know best are the people that are talking, and I'm best served by talking to them regularly. And since we started doing that and really diving in with those one-on-one, sort of key stakeholders in our organization, not only has our relationship improved, but our conversion rates have really improved too. And we're happy to say our pipeline is the highest it's ever been, probably as a direct result of this sort of lockstep style partnership. And I'm so excited to see where we can go as more facets of our product come online later this year.